Today's debate is about one of the most important American holidays, Thanksgiving. Should a sovereign nation, one established on fragile principles of liberty, legitimately declare and sustain a formal, recurring National Day of Thanks? We'll hear the perspectives of President John Adams and Chief Sitting Bull of the Lakota tribal community. Let's start with you, Mr. President, followed by the Chief.
I'll argue that such an act, a day of collective thanksgiving, is not just some pleasant custom, but an essential tool for solidifying the Republican project. It provides a necessary fixed point of moral and political reference for a diverse and, let's be honest, a frequently fractious population. We have to actively foster a national memory.
And I maintain that the success and legitimacy of any government, especially one that claims to be rooted in liberty, cannot possibly warrant such a day of celebration when the very foundations of that nation rest upon ongoing oppression and the systematic denial of sovereignty and basic rights to all peoples within its claimed borders. So the central question for us then is this: does the mere establishment of a new governing structure legitimize a sweeping national commemoration? Or is that commemoration fundamentally invalid, maybe even hypocritical, while injustice and bondage persist? I believe any celebration that ignores suffering is hollow.
I see why you think that, I do. But let me give you a different perspective that emphasizes structure over immediate perfection. We are speaking here of establishing the enduring framework for a free society. A formal day of Thanksgiving is vital for reinforcing the general knowledge among the people that is necessary to preserve the liberty derived from our Maker and secured by our ancestors at the expense of their blood and their estates. Liberty, you see, is not self-sustaining. It must be taught, remembered, and yes, ritualized. To maintain self-governance, the people must be constantly reminded of their fundamental rights and duties. And a national day provides that cohesive civic and moral foundation. History shows us what happens when this foundation is lacking. If we fail to bind the populace through shared rituals and memory, the nation risks falling instantly into the disorder and misrule caused by unchecked factionalism and ambition. I have studied the chaos that destroyed past republics like Florence, where because the people were never united by a common civic purpose, all the seeds that ever existed remained in full vigor, just ready to tear the state apart. We simply can't afford that fate. A commemoration sanctioned by Congress, similar to the resolutions we passed for a fast and public prayer back in March 1776, it serves the public good and stabilizes the entire system.
I come at it from a different way entirely. I just don't buy that a National Day of Thanks can hold any legitimate meaning while vast numbers of people, including those whose land you stand upon, are under bondage and oppression and denied the very rights belonging to them. You celebrate the establishment of order, but from my vantage point, that order is simply the organized, systematic instrument of our suffering. The very spiritual act of true gratitude, giving thanks for life and sustenance, is betrayed by the political reality that your government sanctions the encroachment of unwanted settlers driven by what we know as the invasion. How can we genuinely give thanks when the sources of suffering of the Indian races remain unaddressed, when land is constantly stolen and treaties are broken? When the system you celebrate proves to be of no help, what recourse do we have but to take up arms? I led a warpath launching successful raids on forts like Stevenson and Beaufort's precisely because the established government actively perpetuates injustice instead of delivering on any promise of peace or help. A celebration is premature and frankly deeply insulting when a dark cloud that's so oppressive still hangs over the nations that were here first.
With respect, the dark cloud you speak of is often generated by the very lack of established, predictable justice that a unified government seeks to impose. The celebration I advocate for honors the establishment of legitimate checks on arbitrary power, which is the only way to ensure lasting security. It is a necessary practice because it reminds every citizen of the importance of checks like juries, the necessity of the check of the people on the legislature, and the establishment of courts of record to ensure that justice is documented, predictable, and transparent. This framework is essential for a truly free society. If we do not ritually acknowledge and reinforce this legal structure, we revert to the arbitrary exercise of power. The very kind I opposed when challenging the general writs of assistance, which essentially placed the liberty of every man in the hands of every petty officer, subject to no restraint. The commemoration in this light ensures that this hard-won legal order is never forgotten.
You speak compellingly about the efficacy of this order, but its true test is whom it serves. I acknowledge that you are deeply concerned about oppression, even among your pale faces who struggled for their rights. But your entire legal edifice, your preoccupation with legal theory, with courts and writs, it fails utterly for those of us who live by a different, older law rooted in the land. The systems you praise prioritize paperwork over physical, territorial sovereignty. You worry about arbitrary power applied to property or taxes. We worry about arbitrary power applied to our very existence. When you speak of centralized authority in courts miles away, I see a government that leads directly to the wide-scale devastation of our land and our way of life, because that centralized authority lacks the necessary connection to the land and the people it is destroying. Contrast this with our own system. When we make decisions on warfare, it requires specific elders of each band to agree. The scope of conflict is determined by survival and consensus, not centralized ambition decided by men who have never walked our sacred lands. Your legalism does not equate to freedom when our land is lost and our survival is threatened by the very system you insist on celebrating.
I understand the contrast you draw, I do, between local consensus and centralized legalism, but a national observance is required precisely because local consensus often fragments when external pressures are applied. That fragmentation is exactly what undermines liberty. If the Republic fails, then those courts and writs which provide the only defense against total chaos, they disappear. The commemoration is not just about celebrating the right to establish courts. It's celebrating the successful establishment of a structure large and strong enough to keep the nation from being destroyed by powerful external enemies. If we dissolve into disunity, we become nothing more than a football between contending nations, constantly manipulated by powers like France and England, as we were just decades ago. We must prioritize this civic memory of unity just to secure our existence.
But securing the frame of government is meaningless if that frame lacks moral rectitude regarding the treatment of others. You ask us to celebrate a stability that is bought with our suffering. I ask you, how can the nation pause to give thanks when, as one who has suffered continuous injury, I know that if injury is inflicted, the community ought to resent and to punish? The very celebration of the nation's founding and the alleged prosperity that followed willfully ignores the continuous injury done to the Hung Papa and other nations of the plains. By making this day a national ritual, you are not celebrating unity. You are celebrating an ongoing contradiction. It becomes a moment of political hypocrisy that betrays any genuine spiritual thanks. How can you expect the community to be virtuous if the state itself is not accountable for the profound suffering it creates?
That's a compelling argument regarding immediate accountability, but I would frame the holiday's primary function differently. It is a binding mechanism against the fatal flaws inherent in any republic. You ask for immediate moral rectification, but history demonstrates that political systems cannot withstand the extreme internal dissensions that destroy republics from within. Whether we look to the destructive conflict between the Guelphs and Ghibellines of medieval Italy, or the bitter factionalism that plagued Florence, a lack of shared civic memory allows the Republic to tear itself apart before any complex moral issue can be resolved. The function of this national observance is to prioritize the civic peace and necessary unity required for the long-term defense of the liberty we hold. If the Republic collapses due to internal strife, then your claim for justice, and indeed everyone's claims to rights, are lost completely. It is a necessary trade-off for the sake of survival.
Survival at whose expense? Your argument suggests that the state must stabilize its identity first, even if that identity is inherently unjust. But what if the identity being stabilized is that of the colonizer? The national holiday becomes, by definition, the annual celebration of the successful denial of sovereignty. You speak of internal factions, But what we see is the largest, most powerful faction, the unwanted settlers, systematically dispossessing the smaller nations. This is not mere dissension. This is a political and territorial war sanctioned by the structure you seek to celebrate. The dark cloud does not come from lack of courts. It comes from the pursuit of new territory, which is, in my view, a violation of natural law. I must hold that true peace requires justice, and any celebration without justice is merely a temporary political truce against conscience.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame the nature of this celebration differently. The unity we celebrate is not predicated merely on forgetting past wrongs. It's predicated on acknowledging the capacity for establishment and for growth. We must stress the progress of the young nation, referencing the capacity of Americans for knowledge and civility, and the encouragement of printing and public information. The holiday celebrates the material and intellectual establishment of a republic dedicated to, well, enlightenment and industry. It honors the stability that allows for the widespread dissemination of knowledge, printing presses, public schools, which contrast directly with the idleness and vain speculation that critics of widespread education often bemoan. Our prosperity stems from building a system where every citizen, regardless of status, has access to the means of knowledge, which is an indispensable foundation for true liberty. We celebrate the successful application of disciplined freedom to the establishment of a successful system of government.
I question your definition of prosperity and enlightenment when they are tied so closely to territorial expansion. You speak as if this progress emerged from an empty land, but this prosperity is built upon the dispossession of others. The message from Spirit Life that guides my people speaks of a profound suffering that permeates the land because of this very expansion. The pursuit of new territory and the invasion is a clear violation of natural law. And this violation is sanctioned and celebrated by the very government you seek to anchor with this holiday. The holiday, by formalizing the celebration of this expansion, reinforces the very system that created the bondage. It turns what should be a solemn, heartfelt, spiritual concept into a political lie that masks an ongoing moral crisis. The celebration is not about gratitude. It's about claiming moral justification for a political act of subjugation.
I would maintain that the act of commemoration provides a necessary annual moment of self-reflection, urging the people to adhere to the high ideals of law and liberty upon which the government is theoretically founded. If the nation fails in its moral duties, the existence of the holiday is a constant yearly reminder of the ideals it has violated, providing a mechanism for moral accountability that is far superior to mere anarchy. We are acknowledging that the path toward liberty is long and, yes, imperfect, but the only way to stay on that path is to honor the successful creation of a system built on law, not on arbitrary power or the whims of a conqueror. Without this anchoring tradition, the government and the principles it contains will be lost entirely.
But the anarchy you fear is already the reality for those who have been dispossessed. We face arbitrary power daily, despite your courts and writs, until the foundational wrong of colonization and the denial of territorial sovereignty and freedom is addressed. The day merely serves to obscure the deep moral conflict at the heart of the Republic. True gratitude must stem from moral rectitude, not political convenience. It is not enough to secure the frame of government. The content of that frame must be just.
To summarize my position, a national holiday is an indispensable civic tool, providing a fixed point of moral and political reference necessary to sustain a complex government against the constant threat of internal decay, a faction, and external manipulation. The day affirms the social compact and the primacy of law and liberty, the principles that must endure, however difficult and imperfect the application of that law may be in practice. To secure the system is the first duty. Without the system, there is nothing left to debate.
And I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning. A national holiday cannot redeem a land suffering from systematic injustice. The nation cannot genuinely give thanks for a system built on theft and subjugation. Until the dark cloud is lifted, that day remains a celebration of an incomplete and immoral project. The listener must consider whether stability without justice is truly worthy of national gratitude.
With that, we'll move to final statements. President Adams?
The conflict between establishing civic order, which demands unity and structure, and achieving immediate moral justice, which demands accountability for foundational wrongs, it reveals the deepest tensions within the American experience.
Indeed, it forces us all to weigh the credibility of political celebration against the uncompromising and ongoing demands of moral and territorial accountability.